Well, welcome. My name is Brianna, and I am a licensed and board certified creative arts therapist, author, and educator. And I help adults struggling with insecure attachment go from self doubting to self sovereign and attracting those soul shaking, passionate partnerships that they want. And today I am extremely excited because we have a special guest here to talk with us. Her name is Dr. Jalaja Bonheim. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes, thank you.
And I want to give you a proper introduction. So Dr. Bonheim was raised in Germany and spent years studying Indian temple dance and various therapeutic modalities before settling in the United States. Here she developed a unique type of group process called Circlework, which could be described as an art of creating spaces that feel both safe and sacred and that allow women to connect in a spirit of authenticity, open-heartedness, freedom, and joy. I love that. Besides training hundreds of women leaders in circle leadership, Jalaja has led dozens of workshops and retreats in Israel and the West Bank, where her circles unite Jews and Palestinians. Jalaja is the author of 7 books, of which each is groundbreaking in its own right. Whereas Aphrodite's Daughters celebrates the intersection of sexuality and spirituality, the sacred ego explains why we are destroying ourselves and our planet and how we can contribute to the collective healing that we need. Most recently, in the Magic of Circle Work and the Circle Work Training Manual, Jalaja transmits the essential secrets that make circle work such a profound and transformative experience. Jalaja also counsels and mentors women one-on-one from her home in Ithaca, New York. Welcome. We are so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And so I have a few questions to explore with you here today. And a lot of the questions that I have for you, I did derive from The Sacred Ego, one of your books there, because I felt like it is so relevant and timely. And I wanted to just dive in with the first question, which is in The Sacred Ego, and just to give the full title, The Sacred Ego, Making Peace with Ourselves and Our World. You talk about the differences between heart thinking and head thinking. And if we can shift from head thinking to heart thinking, then that will make way for what you call a planetary ego. And I was just wondering if you might be willing to define those terms and maybe explain a little bit about what does that mean to make way for a planetary ego?
Yes. Yes, hard thinking is a very important term in all the work I do, especially the group work, where that's really what we are cultivating. And so perhaps I'll start with head thinking because that's something we are all so familiar with. It's basically what our entire society runs on is head thinking. And, you know, from a very young age, children are trained to just think with their heads and disconnect really from their bodies and their hearts. Mm-hmm. So in head thinking, what you have is a situation not just where you're using your mind, but where the mind is overriding the heart, and where the heart really has very little say. So when you at first encountered that term, heart thinking, when I was rereading Jung's autobiography, and he speaks of visiting the United States, I think it was in the 1930s, and meeting a Pueblo chief. And the Pueblo chief said, you know, we think the white people are all insane. And Jung said, well, what makes you say that? And the chief said to him, you know, they say that they think with their heads. And Jung said, well, yes, what do you think with? And the chief said, well, of course, we think with our hearts. And for this Pueblo chief, it was really a sign of insanity that here they were these people who didn't know how to think with their hearts. So when we're thinking with our hearts, it's not that we are not using our mind. We are using our mind. It's more a state of balance where we are using the mind, but we are using it in service of the heart. Mm. So I sometimes compare the heart and the mind. You know, you could think of the mind as this sharp knife. It's very good at analyzing. It's very good at separating and seeing distinctions. The heart, on the other hand, is all about connecting. You know, that's what the heart yearns for, is to really have that experience of unity, whether it's with a loved one or with nature or with a piece of music. So you know, you think if you're cooking, you need bowls and you need knives. So we need the head and we need the heart. But we're living in a time when our differences are really threatening to destroy us. And where it is so crucial that we wake up and realize that we have our differences, of course, but we are members of one species living on one small planet. So when I speak of the birth of the planetary ego, I often say that its birthday was 1969, because that was when a human being for the first time looked back from the moon at the planet Earth. And for Neil Armstrong, it was a total spiritual awakening, because he saw for the first time the ultimate unity of our planet. I think it's so interesting right now that we're struggling with this virus, because if there's one thing the virus has really highlighted, is it's global. You know, it affects people everywhere. It doesn't matter what your religion is. It doesn't matter what your nationality is, the color of your skin. It affects all of us. And so I think we are starting to awaken to that need to really understand our oneness. And on that journey, it's all about heart thinking. And hard thinking, you know, people often say to me, oh, well, it's nice, but it's not really practical in the real world. And, you know, as someone who's worked in the Middle East with, you know, this is probably one of the most intractable conflicts on our planet between Jews and Palestinians, I can tell you hard thinking is the only thing that works. You know, as long as you're stuck in the mind, you're going to argue till the cows come home and nothing is going to change. And the same, I think, is true in our personal relationships. When you're in a conflict, it is hard thinking that allows you to shift. It is hard thinking that allows you to find a new, bigger truth that encompasses your separate small truths.
I had a question for you there when you were talking about the heart and the head thinking, and then also translating it into our intimate relationships. And what came up for me when you said that, I recently in my online community, I had a couple people, one person talking about, I had a partner who said they would contact me and they never did. So it was sort of this cutting off without any communication as to why. And then there were others that responded to that who said, I find myself obsessing about the whys. I always have to know why. And if I don't know the why, then I can't let it go. And in partnership, they might chase their partner down, talking at them until they get the answer. And their partner might just want to keep getting away from them. Is like, I don't have an answer for you, or, you know, or I'm not ready to talk about it. Right. And so when I read about the head and the heart thinking, so then the person will say, well, communication is really important to me, and they're not willing to communicate. They're not willing to engage with me. And the way that I see it is, what they're not necessarily looking for the content of the conversation. They're looking for connection, but it's like they're trying to use the head for it's like using the wrong tool for the job.
Yes, exactly.
I wanted to kind of maybe share that with you and see what you thought about that.
Yeah, I think you're right on with that. That what we yearn for is connection. And the only way we often know to do it is through head thinking, because that's all we've been taught. Mm-hmm. But really, head thinking is an instrument of control.
Mm.
You know, it developed as a means of controlling the world. So we've been trying to control nature, control our lives, control everything. And it's not necessarily about connection. And when you look at what are you experiencing when you really feel connected with someone, it's a question of the heart, the body, the vibration. A lot of times I find in my circles it involves slowing down. Whereas when people are in that head level, they want to understand everything and things get really fast and really mental. And it's absolutely counterproductive. Sometimes we just need to sit with it and listen and wait, because it's sort of like, a relationship is like a dance. Mm. And you really need to see where is my partner? Are they ready? And if they're not, give them time. Don't give up on the communication. But if you really are in touch with your heart, you will know when is the right time to move forward and when is it time just to, lay low and trust, really trust.
And one of the things you had made mention of was control. That like when we are, yes, when we're stuck in mind thinking, it's often about needing to be in control. And you also mentioned that in your book about control era conditioning, mm-hmm, and how that ties into thought and belief addictions. And that resonated with me so well, because with my audience, there's lots of like preoccupation. There's a lot of over-analysis. There's a lot, mm-hmm, of feeling obsessive. Behaviorally, it could look like scanning someone's social profile every day because, you're looking for a sign of something. But then there's also some very distinct beliefs that get in the way of maybe having that heart connection, like that are usually fueled by a fear of being hurt or abandoned or, mm-hmm, rejected or judged. So, things like, so for individuals that have what I call an open-hearted attachment style, but traditionally it's called anxious attachment style. But there are some beliefs like, I have to make this work. If I don't make this work, then I can't make it work with anyone, and I'm not good enough. And this indicates something about my value in the world. And if they leave me, they'll probably just marry the next person they date anyway. And, so there's these kinds of thoughts going on. And then for someone who has a more avoidant attachment style, what I like to call a rolling stone, they have beliefs about relationships as being an impediment to, mm-hmm, personal freedom. No matter what I do, it's never enough. And, if I'm with someone, then I have to give up all of myself in order to be in a relationship. They're just giving this to me because they're trying to obligate me to do something I don't want to do. So I find these beliefs coming up a lot, and, yes, and then there being these like thought and belief, like you mentioned, you call them addictions. I would agree with that we get, mm-hmm, stuck on these. And I was wondering if you might be willing to maybe talk about that a little bit more or elaborate on that.
Yes, I think it's worth sort of trying to put it in a little bit of a historical perspective. Mm-hmm. Because when you think about it, human beings lived in small tribal groups for hundreds of thousands of years. Mm-hmm. Not just thousands, but hundreds of thousands. So the lessons of that time are really deeply imprinted on us. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I see happening in a lot of relationships is that there is a transference from the tribe to the partner. So all of a sudden, this partner is my tribe. Mm-hmm. And in tribal times, having a tribe was a matter of life and death. I mean, you could not survive without your tribe. So when that happens with people, it brings in a huge amount of anxiety. There's a lot at stake, more than you rationally would think, mm-hmm, because this person has become my tribe. And if this doesn't work out, basically my life is over. People might not say that, but that undercurrent is there, and that is what I call tribal conditioning.
Mm.
Another thing that happens when this tribal transference goes on is that just as tribes in old times were very separate, there was a clear boundary around each tribe. And people start doing that in their relationships. That, they keep it too private. They don't let anyone in because this is our little tribe. And that too becomes a real problem. So then as you go forward in time, sort of the last 4,000 or 5,000 years is what I call the era of control. And it is all about mostly bringing nature under control. And, you look around at everything around us, the fruits of it are clear. But because it has become an addiction, it's also become very destructive. So even as we have tried to bring nature under control, we're also destroying her. And really what lies at the root of that is a kind of refusal to accept just how vulnerable we really are. Despite all our technology, this virus has also brought that into clear perspective. We are mortal, we're very vulnerable, we're physically vulnerable, emotionally vulnerable. And so this control addiction that we were all raised in is an attempt to push that vulnerability away. So now here you are in a relationship where the vulnerability is amplified because a lot is at stake. And at the same time, it really is the sharing of the vulnerability that helps you bond with your partner. So this is where people often get into this bind where they think, well, if only we figure everything out and we work everything out and we analyze everything, then everything's going to be okay. And what that does really is it sort of saps the juice and the joy out of the connection. When you look at little kids playing or animals, there's so much freedom and joy in it. That's really how we were meant to relate.
Well, there's an element of not knowing, right? Like if you want, play is like, I think of play as a form of exploration. And if you know the whole of a thing, you've already sort of done the exploration, right? So it's like an opening to unfoldment in a way.
Yes. I really think, love takes courage. There's no way around it. It is scary as hell. It takes courage. But one of the things I found in my circles was that the stronger community people had, both in their friendships and beyond that, the better their relationships did. So again, when we sort of go, oh, this person is my tribe, it's very unhealthy. The more we have other relationships that are also intimate and authentic, not just people we know, but where we can really show up just as we are and share our truth. I remember one woman in my circles who was in a relationship that had become abusive. And she was incredibly ashamed of this. And she was in a circle that I led that was going on for years. And it was maybe 2 or 3 years into it that she finally found the courage to speak honestly to the women about what was going on in her relationship. And it made a world of difference. Because all of a sudden she felt no longer ashamed. Other women said, yeah, I've been through that. She felt empowered. She went home with a whole new voice. Literally a new voice. And it completely transformed her relationship. And they're still together today and they're very happy. But I don't think it would have happened if she had kept that in that little tribal circle. It wouldn't have worked.
Yeah. You mentioned two terms, and I think they're really important, and I think my audience especially gets confused around them. So I was wondering if you might be willing to offer some more explanation. The first is vulnerability, and the second is intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
With my audience, I think sometimes there's confusion around when it is safe to be vulnerable and when it is not safe. And so they may try to practice vulnerability, and then they wind up exposing themselves in an unsafe situation. Or they kind of emotionally leak or crowd out the people they're trying to connect with, and then those people feel a bit like they've been sort of inundated, or they feel like it's like an inappropriate circumstance. So maybe the first I might ask is, how might you define vulnerability, and how, if someone's confused about boundaries or when it's appropriate to discern when you're with someone that it is safe to be vulnerable, what guidance might you offer along those lines?
That's such a great question. You know, I mean, vulnerability is simply a fact.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the reality of it. Mm-hmm. All the time, always, we are vulnerable. Mm-hmm. But that's somewhat different than feeling vulnerable. Mm-hmm. You know, when you feel vulnerable, there's a sense of an edge. It could be an edge of shame, or it could be an edge of fear, but there's some kind of edge that tells you there's some risk in revealing this. Mm. And I agree, you know, not everyone is discerning around when it is appropriate or safe to reveal that vulnerability. Mm-hmm. We work a lot in my circles with shame, because I think shame is a huge issue for women. For men too, but I think for women especially, there is so much shame. And once you dismantle the shame, you can share certain facts, like this woman was sharing the abuse in her relationship, without shame. You know, it's a fact, and you can share it when you find it appropriate to share. Mm. But the vulnerability is so precious, and yeah, again, it's a dance of learning when is it appropriate to bring it forward and let others see it. It's like, when is it appropriate to take your clothes off? It isn't always. You have to learn. A little child doesn't know that, and then you learn, okay, in this situation, it's okay, in this, maybe not. Mm-hmm. You know? Yeah. So now intimacy has, to my mind, intimacy has so much to do with presence. Mm. You know, if you're not present, there's no intimacy. Mm-hmm. And so I really feel that presence is, the practice of presence is such a foundational spiritual practice, especially in the context of a society that constantly encourages head thinking. Mm. And when you're in head thinking, you're not present. Mm-hmm. You know? So I feel like we all need some form of daily practice to be present. Mm-hmm. And we have to be creative with it. You know, sometimes people say to me, well, I tried meditation and that wasn't for me. And so, but you know, you might be a gardener, and you might say, the next half hour while I'm gardening, instead of thinking about that conversation I had with my mother-in-law and rehashing it, I'm going to be really present with the leaves and the sunlight and the soil. Mm-hmm. And that is intimacy. Mm. That is intimacy, whether it's, you know, with another person or your cat or a tree. Mm-hmm. So I think that we are raised in this society to be total thought addicts, which means our brains are completely out of control. Yeah. And we know that this kind of incessant thinking causes depression. We know that it makes us unhappy. And we do have tools, for getting out of the mind, getting into the body, becoming present. So I think no matter who you are, no matter what your orientation is, have some daily way of practicing presence, even if it's just for 5 minutes while you're doing the dishes or whatever. It's such a relief to step out of that thought-addicted mind and go, oh, here I am. This is what's real right now.
Mm.
And, when people are having relationship problems, 90% of what's going on is going on in their heads. It's not real. And it does help to step out and get that perspective.
I connect with that, or what I connect with that is, first I want to start off by saying, I am a therapist and all of that. So I think that it's important to be able to talk about what's stressing us out. However, I think that sometimes and other therapists have agreed with me, that there can be this thing that happens where we get stuck there. And there can be an experience of getting stuck in insightful circles. And after a while, the examination, it's in it, like maybe in that in and of itself becomes addictive, right?
Yes.
And I am thinking of a story of someone who commented in my online group that they were frustrated because every time they tried to tell their partner about a past relationship they'd had or something like that, because they felt that they were like, I'm trying to be intimate with them. I'm trying to connect with them. I'm trying to show them that I'm self-reflective and that I'm trying to own my baggage. But anytime I try and talk about this, they get mad or they tune out or they think that I'm criticizing them. And what's interesting to me is because we've been taught that that reviewing our old stories is how to connect in the present moment. And I think sometimes that can actually work against us. That it can inform intimacy, but it's not the whole of intimacy. And I found myself thinking, well, maybe she's getting mad and tuning out or whatever, because those old stories feel like a threat to the connection, like the present connection.
Yes,
I was wondering
yes.
what you thought about that.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree. I also think, as you said, being a therapist, it is important that we tell our stories. And one of my books, Aphrodite's Daughters, the subtitle is Women's Sexual Stories in the Journey of the Soul. Mm. And I would sit with each woman for 2 whole days, and she would tell the story of how living in a woman's body affected her spiritual journey. So there's stories about healing from sexual abuse, about falling in love, about having babies, you name it. Mm-hmm. And the process of telling the story in a sacred container is so healing. Mm-hmm. And I think because a lot of people have never had that, they rely too much on their partners. They want to share their stories. They need to share their stories. Mm-hmm. But it's, again, the partner is becoming the entire tribe. Mm. And that's not what they want to be. Mm-hmm. So they might want to think about, well, maybe I need to join a little circle, a woman's circle, a place where I can share my stories and have other people reflect on them without that pressure that we're putting on our partners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that we ask our partners to hold a lot. I feel like there is this kind of narrow focus on romantic connection. You also use the term spiritual, and you also brought up a historical context. And I often find myself thinking that, especially in the Western world, we are looking for our spiritual connection through our romantic partnerships. And that has not historically always been the vehicle through which we expected that to happen. Do you notice that as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, in one way, I think it's wonderful that our relationships aren't just about raising kids and having a stable container. There is a new kind of function that they have that has to do with the growth of the soul. And I think that that is a beautiful thing. But I totally agree. You cannot completely lean on your relationship for that inner experience of wholeness and sacredness. And the more you demand it, the less it will be there. So over time, it will sort of elude you. So I think it's absolutely crucial that we cultivate, I think of it as really three relationships. There's the relationship to ourselves, which is primary. There's the relationship to our partner. But then there's also the relationship to, you might say, to the relationship itself. So like one practice we sometimes do in our circles is that we give the relationship a voice. We pretend the relationship is a person. And we're asking these questions. What is your function? How can I serve you? How can I make you healthier? What do you want of me? And it's amazing how the relationship itself begins to reveal, this is what I want. This is why I'm here. And I think that helps a lot to clarify, why are we in this? Because the romance takes you only so far. There's got to be more than that.
Yeah, it's just the hook into the movie. You got to sit through the whole thing. Yeah. It really is a third thing that gets created.
It's a third thing, yeah. I mean, in a lot of African societies, they say it's a triangle between two people in spirit. The spirit has brought these two people together for a purpose. And it's their task to find out, what is that purpose? And you could say, well, the purpose is love. Yes, the purpose is always love. But beyond that, there's more.
Yeah.
And So
I think I have 2 more questions for you. The first is, so you do circle work, and what strikes me about this, and you mentioned that there's a couple connections I'm making, and you're talking about, we've had a tribe and now the tribe has become very small, right? And in many cases we focus on one person being our tribe, and that kind of creates a lot of pressure and maybe unrealistic expectation on what you're expecting from that kind of dynamic. And so then you're doing these circles, which I am experiencing as, it's sort of like, well, now you're creating a wider tribe. You're stepping into being able to access those resources in a new way, but in a way that also reflects the expansion of a tribe. Is that an accurate observation?
Well, yes and no. I mean, if you want to use the word tribe in a precise way, then a circle is not a tribe. I mean, we might come together for a weekend and never meet again, So it is a community. And it certainly can offer a lot of that depth and sacredness and intimacy that in former times people found in their tribe. See, today, we don't need tribes anymore, but we do need community. We very much need community. And so for me, circle work is a new way of creating community that is aligned with our present needs. And a lot of people come to my circles who no longer have that intimate family, that extended family. Many live alone, and they want intimacy. But what if they don't have a partner? Does that mean they're doomed to not have it? Well, in the circle, there is intimacy, there is support, there is sacredness, there is sharing. There's all these things that formerly the tribe provided.
The container, a sacred container.
Yes. Yes. It's a place where people can be really authentic.
And so what comes up for me is, this comes up often in my community, is, so you'll say, well, especially in the realms of self-help and personal development and things like that, we'll hear phrases like, trauma is not your fault, but it is your responsibility to heal, right? And so there's this experience for the person who's had that traumatic experience where that but it's like an immediate transition into a form of dismissal. It's sort of like immediately you get the bootstrap image coming up, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and it's almost a repetition of the original kind of, wound. And so I find myself relating to this in that it's sort of that, and I think this relates to what you're talking about with tribal thinking, that we are collective, and there's a shared responsibility.
Yes.
That there is the self responsibility. I refer to that as self-sovereignty, but I feel that's in service of being a participant in the collective, that's kind of the paradox. But I wanted to maybe just, throw that out there and see what your thoughts are on that, because it almost always tends to generate quite a discussion.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the problem there again, is the extreme individualism, where it's like, my story is my story, my wounds are my wounds, I have to heal them. And that's not entirely true. And that's one of the things my circles have really taught me. If someone is working with, let's say, sexual abuse, there are other women in that circle who are doing the same. And it becomes so clear that it is a collective wound. And that on the one hand, that means that I'm not alone. I don't need to be ashamed. It also means that every step that I take towards healing myself is of benefit to everyone else. And that really gives people a lot of encouragement, I find, to really get that it is a we. It is not just an I, it is a we. And many of the wounds that we're working on are quite ancient. Our mothers, our grandmothers worked on them. We're in this together, and I think it's a very exciting time we live in, because everything is being sort of flushed to the surface, which is not always pleasant. But there really is an opportunity for profound healing. And we cannot do it alone. We cannot do it alone. I mean, especially I saw that when I worked in the Middle East. Some of the trauma is just so heavy that if one person tries to hold it by themselves, it just crushes them. But if we put it out together and we hold it together, a transformation occurs. And I've really come to understand that the psyche wants healing. It will move towards healing. We don't need to force it. If we create the container where the trauma can be held and we can hold it together, it will move towards healing.
And I had just one last question. And that is, if you had some guidance for my audience, who are particularly interested in finding secure relationships and connections and attachments, if you had some guidance on how to move towards the heart thinking, and how to approach their relationships from that heart-centered place, what guidance would you offer?
Well, first of all, I would come back to what I said before about the writing practice where you're dialoguing, and I had been speaking about dialoguing with the relationship. It's also wonderful to dialogue with your own heart. It's really just a practice of listening to the heart, but through the writing, people are amazed. A lot of times their heart will say, I thought you would never ask. I'm so glad you're finally listening to me. Our hearts have a lot to say. So that's really such a simple and effective tool for connecting with the heart. And then, I do think it has to be a daily practice. I really do. It has to be a constant practice of, and it has so many different branches. For example, let's say you're talking with someone who could be the mailman or a cashier in the store. notice how different it feels if you connect with your heart and you imagine the connection running from your heart to theirs, as opposed to we're just talking. You will feel, not only will you feel an immediate difference, but the relationship, they will feel it too, even though they might not know why. They will respond differently to you. So the other thing is, the heart is really into pleasure and joy. So I think it's so crucial, especially in a relationship, that we continuously do the things that we love doing, the play we mentioned before, the things that bring you joy. It's so easy for those, especially when couples have kids, for those to sort of fall by the wayside. But those return you to your heart, and the giving of gratitude to your partner, the expression of appreciation, giving gratitude, and to yourself, because like I said, it's scary. It takes a lot of courage. It's a lot of work.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And if someone wanted to, talk to you more about this or learn more about your books and or Circlework, where should they go?
Best place is to go to my website, which is jalajabonheim.com.
We'll include that in the caption. Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for coming. I deeply appreciate it.
Thank you, Brianna, and thanks for all the wonderful work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.